Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Fleur Marty. I'm the producer of the Deus Ex live team at Eidos-Montreal. And today, I'll be talking to you about the process we went through to create Breach, which was originally a game mode for Deus Ex Mankind Divided, and has since become a standalone free-to-play game. So I'm going to start with a quick question. How many of you here have played at least one Deus Ex game? All right. Mankind Divided? All right. And how many of you here have given a try to Breach? Yeah, less hands. All right, so for those of you who haven't, I'll start by quickly explaining what Breach is. So Breach is a game mode for Deus Ex Mankind Divided. In Breach, you're not Adam Jensen, the main protagonist of Mankind Divided. You are a hacker who uses a VR device to infiltrate the servers of mega corporations. Your goal is to steal their secrets, and to do so, you need to find and download the data that's hidden inside the levels. The servers of those mega corporations are hosted in a super secure facility that we call the Palisade Blade. And the AI, which runs this facility, is doing everything it can to stop you. Breach is an asynchronous online experience. It's an arcade twist on the Deus Ex gameplay pillars, with a leaderboard-based competitive aspect and some light free-to-play mechanics. So our launch trailer was actually more than 5 minutes long, so I'm gonna spare you that. But to give you a better idea, if you've never played it, I will show you our latest trailer, which was actually out 2 weeks ago, and sums up the major updates we've been making to the game since it's launched. So to tell you about how we created Breach, I need to start by telling you about the live team and our initial mandate. The Deus Ex live team was created at Eidos-Montreal at the beginning of 2014 with the mandate of taking care of all the additional content for Mankind Divided. In order to let the core team focus 100% of their energy on crafting the main game. That means that any bonus mission, any additional content, item packs, narrative DLCs, the post-launch contents and post-launch operations were to be handled by the live team. The mandate of the team was also to expand the Deus Ex universe and experiment outside of the traditional single-player, story-driven experience. And as part of that mandate, we were supposed to deliver challenge maps, which would be an additional bonus content available day one for every player. The pillars of those challenge maps were, first, that they had to teach the gameplay mechanics of Mankind Divided to the players and allow them to practice and master those mechanics outside of the story-driven campaign. Then we're supposed to bring added replay value to the game while always delivering a true Deus Ex experience. The constraints we had to work with were that we didn't have a lot of resources. We were a very small team, and we had a lot to do. Because again, the challenge maps were only a portion of the additional content we were making for Mankind Divided. We also didn't have a lot of time. We actually started conception 1 year before the initially planned ship date of the game. And we also didn't have a lot of money. Our budget was pretty tight, so we couldn't compensate neither the size of the team or the tight schedule with, for instance, outsourcing some part of the work. The base idea for those challenge maps was to reuse existing environments from the VR tutorial mode of the main game and implement new objectives for these maps. So, for instance, there was a shooting range in that VR tutorial, and we could have implemented challenges like shoot all the targets under 30 seconds, destroy as many targets as possible using only augmentations, do as many headshots as possible, etc. So, side note here, if you have played Mankind Divided and are wondering where the hell were those VR tutorials, well, they didn't make it to the final game. So, how did we go from these VR challenges to a full-on competitive mode with more than 100 levels? Well, what gave birth to the Breach concept is probably a combination of 5 factors. So first of all, the team wasn't particularly excited by the idea, both on the actual implementation side of it, but most of all, we didn't think it was going to be really fun for players. Then there was also, inside the studio, a recurring topic of wanting to make a hacking-focused game. It had been around since the development of Human Revolution, and several concepts were pitched over the years, but none made it past the initial concept stage. And since part of the mandate of the Live team was to explore and expand the Deus Ex universe, we wanted to use the incredibly rich lore at our disposal and put more narrative meat around the bone. We very much liked the fantasy of being a super skilled hacker and the idea of putting at the forefront those corrupt mega corporations that are always in the background of Deus Ex games. Another factor which played a major role in the birth of Breach was that all our level designers were new to Deus Ex. So they were ramping up on the engine and on the level design rules of the franchise by playing around in what we call gyms, where they were building gameplay scenarios using only gray blocks and messing around with them and not paying any attention to the physical constraints or the environmental credibility. We realized that the very simple and modular environment of the VR tutorials would allow them to keep that freedom, even when they were going to build real levels for the game, which is not the case when you create a classical Deus Ex narrative mission, where the credibility of the space and the credibility of the space plays a major role, puts a lot of constraints on the level design. But we still wanted the visual to be carrying some of the narrative. Everything in the art direction of Deus Ex Human Revolution and Mankind Divided is there on purpose. Everything carries a very heavy symbolic, and we wanted that to be true of Breach 2. The added bonus was that actually in the first months of the existence of the team, nobody was really looking at us. All the energy and attention was focused on the main game, and we were supposed to be progressively ramping up on the franchise, and we were free to experiment on our own, without anyone telling us that this was absolutely not what was expected of us. I'll add to that my own background. I come from mobile and indie, small budget games. Deus Ex was my very first AAA experience, and I was used to making a lot with very little resources. So my naivete at the time probably played a big role in allowing the team and even encouraging them to push the creative boundaries and to go for something that really excited them, even if it was way more than what we were supposed to deliver. So when we came up with the idea for Breach after a brainstorming session, we had a little bit more than a month before the first greenlight meeting for the live team, where we were supposed to present our whole creative and production plan for all the contents tied to Deus Ex Mankind Divided. By this date, we would need to have enough to convince the higher-ups, meaning the Square Enix management, but first of all, the Deus Ex executive of the franchise, and the studio head, that Breach was a better concept than the initially planned challenge maps, even though it meant a lot more work and most probably a bigger team than the one originally planned. So we did two things. First, we crafted a 50-plus slide presentation of the concept, detailing our vision for all the gameplay mechanics, the scoring and reward systems, the level design philosophy, the core loop, the online features, the character building, the player fantasy, the backstory, the ties to the main game, the business model, the economic loop, all of it. The presentation detailed the main production milestones for all this and already laid out which features would be present at launch and which ones would be part of the post-launch plan. It also presented how we envisioned the post-launch lifecycle with promotion events, content patches, and balancing updates. The second thing we did was prototyping the core experience of Breach, and especially the gameplay parts that were unique to it compared to the main game. So extracting data, escaping the map, applying modifiers, computing the player score, etc. Enough to be able to back up the PowerPoint presentation with some concrete hands-on gameplay and prove the base concept was solid and fun, even if the deadline was way too tight for us to have a full first playable. So here's what the game looked like at that time, and I must warn you, it might hurt your eyes a little bit. This is very old. And you know what? It worked. Yeah, I'm not sure that deserves that much, but it worked. We were allowed to go on with the development of our first playable, which we actually delivered a few weeks later after only 3 months had passed since that very first brainstorm on the concept. And I got the green light to add some very much needed key resources to the team. Which leads me to a short parenthesis about the team before going back to the development of Breach itself. So since the initial mandate of the live team was essentially to create new content, and we weren't supposed to be actually adding features, or very few of them, to the game, the vast majority of the initial roster was composed of artists, level designers, and narrative designers. The theory was that all we had to do would be to take the existing systems, features, and tools developed by the core team and use them to create new content. We would be in charge of creating our own assets and storylines, of course, but that was mainly it. But bringing Breach into the mix created a big recruitment challenge. It meant that we actually needed more game designers, audio designers, UI designers, as well as a bunch of programmers, and not only for gameplay, but for all the online side and the massive amount of UI we're about to add. Still, we couldn't go crazy and inflate the team too much because, well, it wouldn't make sense budget-wise. And one of the biggest challenge in building the Breach team was to find generalists. So we basically had to build a team of Swiss Army knives. And in the AAA industry, where people are pushed to be hyper-specialized, where they invest years into developing very specific expertise, this happens to be a very tough thing. If you add to that at that time, in the studio, we were that weird new team labeled as the DLC team, the B team, and that everybody just wanted to get on the big AAA core team. Finding the right people proved to be very difficult. But you know what? Actually, I firmly believe that this all played a major role on making the team a success, with everybody having a lot of ownership on the content, and not only on Breach, but also all the DLCs and the other stuff we made for My Kind Divided. The people who joined us chose to do it. And since there was not many of us, everybody had a big role to play, and I had the opportunity to be a real part of the creative process. And since we were a small team, well, we could all fit in a single room together to show our work to each other, to play our game together, and exchange feedback and ideas in a very fluid manner. And this very quickly created a solid bond and a sense of belonging. And I truly believe that we made a better game for it. The small size of the team also allowed us to have a lot of interaction between the designers and the programmers. And that was a blessing, because given the very tight schedule we were on, we basically did the conception, the pre-production, and the production at the same time. So some features were actually still being designed at the same time as they were implemented by the progs, and with a bigger team, it could have been way more problematic. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's ideal and that there wasn't any problem. And no, this is not the ideal way to do it. But for us, in a sense, it kind of worked. So back to our main subject. Of course, there are things that set immediately Breach apart from the core single experience. First, we throw the player in a completely different visual environment. Then we introduce them to the concept of data extraction, which is unique to Breach. And of course, in Breach, you're not Adam Jensen, but a Ripper, a hacker from 2029. Finally, the presence of leaderboards introduces a competitive element which doesn't exist at all in the single player. But still, at its core, Breach respects the fundamental pillars of Deus Ex. Apart from a very few, very optional exceptions, all the maps can be played using whatever play style the player prefers. From full-on ghosting to blasting your way through the level and everything in between, or even playing without ever using a single augmentation, Breach allows players to approach the challenges any way they like. And of course, there are always plenty of different paths to get to your objective. But very early during the development process, we made the conscious choice to throw the players out of their comfort zone, to offer them the opportunity to try something new, to discover that maybe they might actually enjoy things that they had never tried in the main campaign. And we used several different devices to gently but firmly push them in that direction. For starters, each of the corporations that you infiltrate in Breach has its own gameplay personality. So for instance, the Tarvos Corporation is your classic Deus Ex tight layout, filled with mixed defenses of humanoids, cameras, and lasers, and of course, a lot of air vents. Steiner Beasley, on the other hand, confronts the player to wide open areas swarming with guards and turrets. While the VersaLife levels are all about verticality, platforming puzzles, and hazards. Of course, you could apply the same exact gameplay style to all of these maps and still be able to beat them. But if you are embracing the competitive aspect of Breach, then you will have to be versatile and adapt the way you play. We also created and implemented the concept of what we call AI evolutions. Every action that the player performs is recorded and taken into account to move one of the 3 AI meters: damage, defense, and delay. For instance, offensive actions against the defenses of the map will increase the damage meter. And the game will react to it by making the enemies have better weapons, deal more damages, or gain some resistance to some type of damages. Once this has happened enough times, the player has 2 choices: using pretty rare items that we call nuke viruses to downgrade the AI evolution, because it's now pretty hardcore, or simply opt for a less aggressive playstyle, staying out of combat. Of course, true to the Deus Ex philosophy, the same principle applies to actions oriented towards stealth or hacking. The way we handle the equipment available for the player also plays a big role into bringing them out of their comfort zone. Everybody starts Breach with the same basic loadout, but one of the main differences with the single player is that there is no loot inside the levels. Enemies vanish once they have been eliminated, so there is no corpse to loot from. Instead, all the equipment needed by the player, the weapons, the ammunitions, the healing items, etc., are found in randomized booster packs that players are either awarded or that they can purchase with the credits that they gain from extracting the data. The randomness factor is very important because it means that there is a very good chance you won't get your favorite weapon before a while. And even if you get it, the rarity system, which is another feature unique to Breach, might cause you to get a very powerful, say, sniper rifle, well, when your favorite weapon that you've used in the single-player campaign is a shotgun. But if you get a very rare Class S sniper rifle, super powerful, it might make you think twice before you just stick on using your old Class C super weak shotgun. But different enemies have different weaknesses or resistances, and there again, players also have to adapt and get out of their comfort zone to try out new weapons and strategies. The leaderboards are also a way for us to give an incentive to players to try new things. Each of the Breach level has 2 leaderboards, score and time. Obviously, someone cheated there. Aiming for the top of the time leaderboard means trying to complete your main objective and escape the map in the minimum amount of time possible, which means ignoring side objectives, not losing any time getting into fights with the AIs, not exploring for any hidden data, and finding the best augmentation combination possible to exploit every shortcut in the map. Thus, being on top of the time leaderboard has a very good chance to mean that your score will totally suck. While on the other end, if you take your time in the map, if you chain XP heavy actions, if you hack everything, if you take down or kill everyone, if you destroy every robotic defense and find every single bit of data, your score has a very good chance to be on the higher end, putting you in a better position on the score leaderboard, but make you fail down on the time leaderboard. For the anecdote, the time leaderboard wasn't really part of the initial concept. But when we started playing the game on the floor, we realized that the speedrunning aspect it was bringing to the Deus Ex gameplay was probably one of the most exciting and unique features of Breach. It is also the one that has generated the most emergent gameplay, both in user testing and on the floor. And there is nothing more satisfying than the look on the level designer's face when they see your name on the leaderboard of a map that they've designed next to a time lower than they thought was possible to achieve. We actually made one exception to the golden rule of freedom of playstyle. And some of the maps in Breach require that the players reach their data objective without being detected, forcing them to play stealth. These maps are always an optional path in the overall progression, but completionists will have to defeat them if they want to beat 100% of the levels. And I admit this was completely arbitrary decision because we are kind of biased towards stealth. For some reason, we thought it would also be really cool to have some heavy platforming navigation in some of the levels, mainly in the VersaLife maps. But since all the 3 Cs were inherited from the main game, which has next to no platforming mechanics, solving all the ledge grab and jumping related bugs was kind of super low priority for the core team, which is totally understandable. So for a very long time, while our user tests suffered very badly from the frustration this was causing to players, who pretty much looked like this. Yep, that's it. But the bright side of this is that it actually pushed us to develop one of the coolest breach-specific augmentations, which is the multi-jump. And it ended up solving a lot of our ledge grab issues. Another area where we tried to bite off more than we could chew was the AI, and especially its behavior related to data towers. Originally, the design was that downloading data would attract the AI's attention, and that the player would have to stay near the tower while the data was downloaded, which meant that they would have to either fight the incoming AIs or find a way to stay near but undetected if they were going for stealth. Unfortunately, that meant some heavy work on the AI side, and since the team didn't have a dedicated AI programmer, we never managed to get a satisfying result, and not for lack of trying. So after long debates, and with a lot of regrets, we dropped this part of the design. But the funny thing is that we discovered it actually made the game way better. It made it way more dynamic and fast-paced, which was a really good thing, and it played really well into our already established bias towards speedrunning. Another fundamental pillar of a Deus Ex game is the choice and consequences, and without the whole social aspect of the single player, we had to transcribe this into gameplay features. So for instance, we created modifiers that we call patches. Patches are applied to a map and modify the rules, making the map harder in exchange for a score bonus. Some patches have a direct effect on the player or the AI, like for instance draining the player's life every second or giving a regen to the enemies, while other patches are conditional and can be failed, like for instance if the player sustains any damage during the level or uses any weapon other than a pistol. Failing those patches won't make the player fail the level, but they won't get the score bonus tied to it, and since the patches are consumed on use, players might want to be careful on when to use them. And of course, the meaner the patch used by the player, the bigger the bonus is. And if you're feeling extra confident about your skill on a particular level, well, you can even stack patches for a bigger bonus. We also made a major modification to the augmentation tree system by adding a memory space cost to each aug. This means that even if the player has gained enough praxis kits to unlock all of the available augmentations, the limited memory space available prevents them from equipping all the augs at the same time. And since once a level has started, the aug tree is locked, players must make a conscious choice before entering a level on which augs they want to take with them. Of course, this choice should be different depending on the actual map they're trying to beat and if they're going for score or for time, and of course based on their playstyle. I'm sorry, what did I do? Yes. The inventory system, a big classic of Deus Ex, was also revisited with the choice and consequences in mind. In Breach, the players actually have two inventories. The reserve, which is basically a stash with infinite space where all the items found in booster packs go, and the loadout, which contains everything the player has access to while breaching a level. The loadout reuses the main game's inventory system, but with heavily limited available space, so that here again, players are faced with a strategic choice about what to bring with them inside the levels, depending on their playstyle or the type of defenses they can expect to face in there. We also created items which give you bonuses as long as they are present in your loadout. This means that you have to trade space in exchange for that bonus, and that space would be otherwise used for weapons or ammunitions or healing items. And of course, the bigger the bonus, the more space you have to sacrifice for it. Now, let's talk visual. So, at first glance, the art direction of Breach can feel completely disconnected from the visual style of both Human Revolution and Mankind Divided. But it's actually far from being the case. So first came the Fuchsia. So for those of you who haven't played Human Revolution or Mankind Divided, who have played them, sorry, I don't know if you've noticed, but there is no fuchsia or a pink or purple in the game. It is the forbidden color of the Deus Ex art Bible, with one exception. It is worn by Eliza Cassan, one of the major characters of the game, who, it turns out, isn't real. I'm sorry for any spoiler. Eliza is an AI, so it made immediate sense to us to make it the base color of Breach. The color of data. When we submitted this idea to Jonathan-Jacques Beltet, the executive art director of the franchise, he immediately embraced it and gave us his benediction to use the forbidden color. So once we had the fuchsia, came the corporations. So for various reasons, among which giving as much freedom possible to the level designers and working with modules to get production costs under control, we wanted to keep the art style very simple, but we needed it to convey the narrative, and especially the real-world backstory of the various corporations that you infiltrate in the VR world. So while the base building blocks are the same in every level, with a white outer shell, black inner blocks, and fuchsia magma, we played with the shapes and the lighting to give each server a very different mood. And we created specific landmarks which both help convey the narrative and serve as orientation device for the player. So for instance, in the Deus Ex universe, the Steiner-Bisley Corporation is a German corporation which manufactures weapons. So in the VR world of Breach, their servers are foundry-like rooms with pixelated magma and orange fog in the air. And in the ceiling of the Talon Pike map, a giant grinder rotates in an infinite loop, breaking down the data magma into data shards. Then, of course, once we had the corporations, we had to populate the world. And we started with the Reaper's avatar. And among our production constraints, we had to work with Adam Jensen. We had to reuse him as much as we could, in terms of gameplay, of course, but also in terms of animation, overall build, down to his geometry, and especially his arms, because we didn't have any rigger, any skinner, or any animator on the team. So the challenge was to turn that constraint into a design element, which ended up with that dual material look, the solid black arms, which are the original models, and the more abstract-looking gold triangles, which were both a way to have it stand out against the mostly black and white environments, and a nod to Human Revolution's Collector's Edition key art. And once the logic of the VR world had been laid out, designing the enemies was only a matter of figuring out how that world would generate them. So, as for almost everything else, we inherited most of the enemies from Mankind Divided's casts. So drones, the sentry boats, the turrets, etc. But the humanoids that we call the Sentinels, they stood out, as they were the only human-like in Breach among the mostly mechanical other enemy types. And in the context of being inside a machine, it kind of felt out of place. And that's a key notion in the Deus Ex franchise, that everything has to feel logical, that everything has to be credible and to belong with the rest. So we came up with the idea that while the rest of the defenses were logical defense systems in the context of Breach, which again is a machine using machine-like units to defend itself, the Sentinels were a response to the presence of the Reaper. It's the AI from the Palisade that is trying to come up with something to match the new threat that the Reapers are. So we tried to have a humanoid that felt like an approximation, an average. And we got inspired by the point clouds that you can see in a Kinect's infrared feed. In motion, you can tell it's human, but in a static frame, it's only abstract data, which felt like how the AI would perceive the Reapers. Once we had that down, all we had to do was making sure that the Sentinels' building blocks came from the same rule set that defined all of the other elements of the world. So the black cubes and the white triangular plating, and voila. So in the first iteration of the Breach concept, the narrative layer was extremely thin. There was the backstory of the Breach, the references to the Deus Ex corporations, and the symbolism of the art style. And we had planned to hide pieces of information inside the data downloaded in the level. Players would stumble across those pieces more or less randomly and get insights on characters and factions from the main game. But we realized fairly quickly that we couldn't be making a Deus Ex game, even a game mode, without a stronger narrative layer. Because Deus Ex is a story-heavy franchise, and the Breach was already weird enough in itself without taking the risk to alienate our core story-driven players from the beginning. But we also didn't have the resources or the budget to tell stories in the traditional way, to make cutscenes, to record voiceovers, to handle branching conversations. Then we discovered that the core team had developed a text messenger system for the main game. And since having text-based interaction with people totally made sense in the context of Breach, which takes place inside a computer, we decided to use it as a foundation for our storytelling. So this is how we came up with the Darknet files, which are self-contained conspiracies that you get to investigate by infiltrating specific servers in search of data shards. Along the way, contacts help you decrypt or make sense of the data, ask you for help, or send you to attack designated servers to disrupt the real-world security systems of a corporation while they physically infiltrate it. Each conversation with contacts has branching choices, and the system carries over your relationship status with your contacts from one case to another. So for instance, if you've been a dick with a contact in the VersaLife case, when you will need this contact's help in the Steiner-Bisley case, well, they will ask you for a higher price in exchange for their services. At the end of each Darknet file, when the player has solved the case, a Picus news broadcast is shown to them, making the link between what they did in the VR world and the impact it had on the real world. Here's an example.
We now turn to Lyon, France, where earlier today, the Santo Group held a press conference debunking what they claim are unfounded rumors regarding their Grand Rabia project. Santo felt the need to respond after allegedly leaked documents on the internet began to cast doubt on the project's integrity. A representative assures us that every home paid for is in fact being built, and that their city of the future is well on track to accommodate the more than 100,000 augmented people projected to move there. Any information to the contrary, they claim, is the product of doctored reports being uploaded by malicious hackers called Rippers in an effort to discredit the corporation. I do not know about you folks, but I prefer to trust the people in suits over these mysterious Rippers who will not even reveal their names or just how they came across their information. This is Eliza Kassan, reporting to you live from Picus.
The Darknet files are a perfect example of a feature built on top of something developed for the main game that we repurposed for our own needs and to which we added a few breach-only specifics. All the writing was done inside the team, but in close collaboration with Marty, the executive narrative director of the Deus Ex franchise, who's also the keeper of the lore. The Darknet files turned out to be one of the most appreciated features of Breach in user testing, and one of the hooks that allowed us to get the story-driven players to give a chance to the mode, while they would probably have ignored it otherwise. The newscasts at the end are also a very simple and efficient way to tie in the world of Breach and the Rippers to the world of Mankind Divided and of Adam Jensen. We actually managed to do quite a few of these tie-ins, integrating references to the Breach in the single-player experience. This ad, for instance, seen in Mankind Divided, shows the Palisade Blade, which is the physical facility that's hosting the servers that the Rippers infiltrate in Breach. In the single-player campaign, also, Jensen has to go inside the VR world to steal some information, and the environment that is used is actually a modified map from Breach. But our biggest tie-in was, logically, one of the live team's productions. System Rift, our first narrative DLC for Mankind Divided, explains how the Breach came to be. And of course, it's all Jensen's fault. And it introduces players to Shadowchild, a famous hacker who turns out to be the one who's guiding you inside Breach. Now, let's talk about the more sensitive stuff, shall we? So it's not uncommon today to have microtransactions in the multiplayer live modes of games on all platforms and in premium games. As it is a completely different experience that you add on top of the game, it doesn't impact the main experience. And being a live team, exploring alternative revenue models was part of our initial mandate. But we were all very aware of the fact that players would already have spent $60, or if you're based in Canada like us, $80, to buy Mankind Divided, and that it would be extremely unfair to put up any kind of paywall. It was also very clear to us that any real money spent had to be completely optional and shouldn't be turning the game into a pay-to-win. We also had one big disadvantage. Deus Ex is mainly a first-person game, even if the cover system and the takedown switch the camera to third-person. And Breach is not a PvP real-time multiplayer, so the interests of Vanity Items, which are the most accepted form of microtransactions, was vastly limited. In the end, our monetized features can be broken down into 3 categories. First, we have accelerators, or using money to obtain faster something you could have otherwise obtained by simply playing the game a little longer. Then we have the cool, weird stuff, like our premium weapons, which are not more powerful than other S or A grade weapons that you can obtain in regular booster packs that you can purchase with the in-game currency. They just have a unique skin and unique gameplay features. And believe me, some are really weirder than powerful. Like our no-scope rifle, which is a very powerful sniper rifle, except its scope is obstructed. So you can't use it, and you can only do hip fire with the sniper rifle. Finally, vanity items, like our unique skins for the Reaper avatar. We still went for them, even considering the previously mentioned factors of the first-person game, but we did bet on getting some interest in them from streamers. So when I say that we were careful with the monetization, I'm really not joking. We had pretty heated debates about what was crossing the line or not, and when in doubt, we always defaulted to not going with something that could be perceived even a tiny bit borderline. In the end, we probably wasted a lot of energy on this for nothing. No matter how careful, how respectful we tried to be in our economic design, what we really didn't foresee was that our player base was absolutely not ready for this. And while the critical reception for Breach from the press was really good, and we didn't hide the monetization from them, the simple presence of real money transactions in the game created an unforeseen outrage among our players, and it completely overshadowed everything else. Things would probably have been different if Breach had been released right away as a standalone Deus Ex Universe free-to-play game. But as a game mode, offered as a bonus alongside a full-priced game, the monetization was a deal breaker for a big majority of the players of Mankind Divided. And this, for me, is where the experimentation found its limits. I am extremely proud of the work the team has done with Breach. And I truly believe that we have proved we could take the core DNA of the franchise and make something extremely innovative and different without betraying it. The only issue is that the business model was not ready to be experimented with. So, to wrap up, here are a few takeaways from the Breach experimentation I would like to share with you. First, I firmly believe it is absolutely possible to innovate and experiment within an already established franchise without betraying it, if you know exactly what your core pillars are, especially in the mind of your players, and you are able to think of new ways to express those pillars. Then you don't have to reinvent the wheel and rethink all your core mechanics. By using them as building blocks that you twist a little bit and present in a different way to your players, you can create a whole new experience. But the way you deliver and communicate about that new experience matters. And know where are the limits of your fan base and what they are ready to accept or not. Again, I think if Breach had been a standalone free-to-play game from the beginning, the reception from our players would have been very different. So this concludes my presentation today. Before taking questions, if you have any, I would like to give a big shout out to my team, part of which you can see in this very cheesy, heart-shaped picture. I would like to thank them for the 3 pretty awesome years that we spent together making a pretty awesome game. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think there are mics there. Just go and ask away.
Hi. I was wondering, how did you manage the switch from being a game mode on a premium game to the free-to-play? Were there many big challenges, like with the team or the system?
Absolutely not, because the free-to-play standalone version of Breach is actually a collection of everything we had made so far for the game. And we released it on Steam only, so it was really easy to do, and we didn't touch at all the economic model or anything. We just wanted to give the opportunity to players who didn't buy Mankind Divided to play Bridge.
So with the community reception of the microtransactions not being very positive, how did you see that carry over to some of the behaviors within it? Like, did you see certain noticeable groups of players still engage with the microtransactions, but that could be grouped separately somehow? Or
so we have the most active, like we still have a community of players who became very active and who have like recorded tons of videos and how-tos and post on the forums all the time. A tiny community, I must say. And they don't engage a lot with the microtransactions. But it's not a surprise because, again, we were so careful in the economic design. I mean, you need to want to give us your money to do it. I mean, there's really no other thing.
Okay, thanks.
Hi there. So I counted about 30 people inside of the live ops team.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask exactly how many of those were level designers and gameplay programmers and sort of the guys that were making the meat of the content.
So I'm not going to get into very specific numbers because I don't think I have the right to. So what you have to understand is that that picture is both the Breach team and the team that was making the DLCs. Some of those people were working on both, like our programmers, for instance. But the level designers and the artists were separated into people working on Breach and people working on DLCs. And so on Breach we had two main level designers who made kind of all of the majority of the levels, with a bit more people chime in. And as far as gameplay programmers, well, the programming team for the whole live team was about 8 programmers.
Okay, thank you. I just had one more question as well, based around. So I realize you've released the game now as a standalone.
Yeah.
Originally, it was kind of a menu option inside of the main game.
Yes.
And I wondered whether you had many metrics on people getting kind of lost about that, because I know some people were confused about what Breach was, but the fact that it was kind of in that first section of the first splash screen that you have.
So the thing is, I don't have metrics about if the people were lost about it. I know that about 30% of the players of Mankind Divided have played Breach. Okay. That's the one thing I know. The menu to when you're inside Mankind Divided's main menu, it says Enter the Breach. I think the sub menu. I think if you go in there and you just watch the cinematic, then you kind of understand what it's about. I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, thank you.
In user testing, nobody ever told us that they were lost about it. That's just...
Okay, thanks. Very informative talk.
Thank you.
Hello, I have a question about the avatar vanity items. You said you had some doubts while introducing them, but I saw in the latest update you also introduced some new ones. So I would like to ask you, from perspective, how successful you would say they are or they were.
Well, they are part of the things that sell the most because they're cool, I think, and they're cool looking, and people like cool looking stuff. But still, again, the overall performance of the monetization of Breach is really low, so it's not super significant to say that something is more successful than another with tiny numbers like that.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome. Do we have another? Yes.
Yeah, so you said that there's a DLC team and a Breach team. So is DLC a paid...
Yes.
Paid DLC. So is there a possibility that you take all the bundles and just make it a paid DLC on top of Breach, so that Breach remains free and that everything that you want to add is just 1 or 2 or 3 payments as DLC, and then you don't have microtransactions, and then you just avoid the whole problem, and you can totally monetize it as just 3 options.
That's probably something we should have considered, honestly. With now seeing it, I would say that would have been probably better for our players and better perceived. We didn't do it like that. And it's probably too late to change anything about this.
One of the things you guys couldn't have caught in process, if you need the get out of jail free card, is that ESPN wrote a scathing destruction piece about microtransaction economies on Steam that disseminated infinitely broadly and raised the anger level about microtransactions to so much that Valve had to respond. And there were timing issues. We had very angry YouTubers come at us with a very loud voice saying not so true stuff. And we did a lot of concept testing and user research, and we really asked the question to fans of Deus Ex about the monetization and stuff, because we wanted to be careful about it. And again, it wasn't foreseen. The reaction at release was nothing like we had anticipated. We thought there would be a bit of backlash, but not that amount. Well, thank you, everybody. And don't forget to fill out your surveys. I've been asked to remind that of you. Fill out your surveys.